57, from my understanding, there are a few amendments to be made, and so I open the floor to the member. I recognize Rep. Babalta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members, for the discussion on House Bill 22-57 and the amendments that were proposed. At this time, I think that since the author of the bill is present, maybe we can recognize him to hear from the author on the proposed amendment.
No objection to the amendment made by the members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Rep. Babalta. I recognize Rep. Sabah.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to add to Representative Babalta's request, I think it would also be helpful to establish for the record the background for this bill, because it does have some history, some version of this has been introduced before, and the importance of the legislation and its relevance is still very much true today. So I think it would be helpful for the members, especially our new members of the legislature, to hear a little bit more about that history. So I'd like to ask the author of the bill to explain that as well. Thank you.
Recognize Rep. Yumo. It's not official language, strange.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill that I'm proposing has a brief history. It was passed in both houses back in the 18th legislature. It was a bill that was followed or was introduced during President Obama's time. A bill named as Hiring Incentive Restore Employment Act back in 2010. So it did pass both houses back in the 18th legislature, but then former Governor Enos vetoed it because back in 2013, the cinema was experiencing low revenue. So at that time, he deemed it not necessary to pass, and it was basically going to hurt the economy more, the cinema revenue collection. So I introduced it again because over 3,000 employees were affected last year and current during the pandemic when they were either furloughed or released or contract terminated. So it's time we introduce this. The PUA is ending, and the lost wages will be ending as well. So we need to pretty much give incentive to the businesses to hire these employees that are affected. And one way to do that is to through a tax credit. I'm okay with choosing one of the either or, whether it's Northern Mariana's taxes or the excise or business gross tax. I'm okay with that. I do prefer the 2,500, but as you know, majority rules. I'm okay with the proposed of 1,005 credit per employee, and that's pretty much it. Rep. Sabana can elaborate more eloquently than I do.
Thank you, Rep. Yumo. Floor is now open for any proposed amendment. I recognize Representative Sabla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, floor leader, for providing that background and also for your willingness to negotiate some changes to the bill. So the amendments that we've been discussing since yesterday are as follows. Starting on page 1 and the findings, and I apologize, I don't have the line numbers, but towards the end of that paragraph, to cross out the words NMTIT, excise taxes, or so that the sentence would read that the intent of the legislature is to provide a local tax incentive by providing for a tax credit against the business gross revenue tax. And then on the second page, we would include in section 101A the language after United States permanent resident. There would be a comma, or actually, I'm sorry, there would be a comma after United States citizen, cross out the word or, insert a comma after permanent resident, and insert the words or citizen of the freely associated states who is a resident of the CNMI, comma. So we're including citizens of the freely associated states to, if they are hired by an employer, that employer would qualify for this tax credit. And then that line after that, we're crossing out $2,500 and inserting $1,500 per worker. So that would be the amount of the credit against the BGR. And this is actually what was in the original proposal. Right, yes, thank you. And so, council, you would have to cross out the remaining parts of the code that are referenced now that we have removed NMTIT and excise tax. So we would just retain the business gross receipts tax part that's codified.
Title 4, 1301.
Yes, Title 4, Section 1301. Is that clear? And then the only other change after that is on page 3 for the sunset clause to cross out on December 31st, 2023 and insert 1 year after it becomes law. And so I would note too that one of the concerns that was raised by then Governor Enos and also by the Secretary of Finance was the duration of the tax credit. And so you know, we could see the impact of this tax credit after 1 year, and then the legislature could then decide whether to extend it or allow it to lapse. And I so move. Thank you.
Rep. Sablan made a motion with proposed amendments to this bill and was seconded. Discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the proposed amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Back to the main motion. Any other discussion on House Bill 22-57?
Ready.
HD1. Can I get a motion to adopt?
Second.
Motion to adopt House Bill 22-57 HD1 was made and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Ready? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Ayes have it. House Bill 22-57 HD1 is hereby adopted. Ms. Claire, please make the necessary changes and prepare the committee report. Thank you. Members, moving on. Last item under new business, we have Governor Communication 22-29, renewal authority of the Secretary of Finance to reprogram or transfer funds from accounts of any department, agency, office, board, commission, corporation, instrumentality, or other entity of any branch of the Commonwealth government in order to meet the threat of COVID-19. Discussion on the communication. I recognize Rep. Belal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for entertaining
Executive Order 2021-08, where the governor is renewing the authority of the Secretary of Finance to reprogram or transfer funds from accounts of any department, agency, office, board, commission, corporation, instrumentality, or other entity of any branch of the Commonwealth government in order to meet the threat of COVID-19. Members and Mr. Chairman, I'm really grateful that our speaker, Mr. Villagomez, referred this communication to this committee so that we can discuss our concerns and the concerns of our community regarding this executive order. I am not alone when I share concerns about the overreach of this kind of power, dipping into the funding sources of any department, agency, board, commission, and especially branch. And so I would like to ask legal counsel for clarification on ways, appropriate ways, this committee can respond to this executive order and the process that entails, and what we can offer the House at our next session. May I ask for that clarification, Mr. Chairman, from our legal counsel?
Sure, counsel?
Sure. Thanks very much for the notice for this question.
You're welcome. He's not joking. Oh, he's not being sarcastic.
It's hard to tell sometimes, but I'm being somewhat sarcastic, so sincere. But the question is actually a matter of relatively first impression. We have very rarely taken the issue of an executive order up. And this definitely is for the first time for most of the members here, and it's probably the first for me. So the constitutional answer is 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate have to act affirmatively to amend or reject the EO, the executive order. Absent 2/3 from both houses, the executive order will basically lapse into law after 60 days in this particular case, I believe. And so if this committee wishes to amend or reject the executive order, then I believe it would be proper for a committee report to be issued recommending to the full House that the EO should be amended thusly or in this fashion, and provide an amended or amendment to it, or if the committee wants to go in a different direction, we can discuss that too. We can propose language to be amended in this committee report, and then send the committee report to the House in the next session. And then at that point, the House can adopt or reject that committee report. And by doing so, that report would effectively be the rejection or the acceptance if it fails to get the requisite amount, 2/3 of all members.
Thank you, legal counsel. Members, I really would like to hear from the rest of you. I understand that, because this is unprecedented, it may spark some kind of drama.
Also,
And so, at least, at the very least, if we can amend this executive order to remove any branch and just leave the powers of reprogramming within the executive branch, I am comfortable with that. Since the governor already has that 100% reprogramming authority with the current budget. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. I would definitely like to remove the powers for the Secretary of Finance to reach into any other branch. That's the first priority. And then the second would be to also protect our autonomous agencies. And I think that would be, that would probably be the smartest way for us to ensure that the amendment would gain the support of 2/3 of this House and the Senate side. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Peralta. I recognize Rep. Pro.
Thank you, Chairman and Rep. Peralta. I wholeheartedly and unequivocally agree with you, everything you've said. If you're asking for options, I do believe that's the best thing moving forward. I also think we legislate. That's part of our duties. that we quickly put together legislation that prevents this governor or any future governors from having that authority for 100% reprogramming authority, dipping into a separate but equal branch that we often so talk about. Let's put our feet to the fire. Let's see who would support such legislation to ensure that he doesn't touch our budget and have that reprogramming authority to come in and take whatever he feels is necessary. Because we have to take a stand. This legislature does not belong to the governor. We need to stand on our own feet. And I support you 100%, but I do believe that with this leadership, we could easily come up with of course, with our legal counsel and our legislative assistance, we could come up with legislation to fix this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rev Pro. So just to clarify, Rev, about you're proposing to change or to omit the any branch part of this executive order?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, any branch and any language there that might imply that the authority is granted to impact autonomous agencies. So, I guess I would refer that to legal counsel when it comes time to proposing certain language.
Thank you. So clarify, floor is still open for the member. I recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Abata, for articulating I think the most important issues that are raised by this governor's executive order. It's been a series of executive orders asserting this kind of unprecedented, overreaching authority. And I like the idea, I support the idea of preparing a report and making changes to the executive order that would limit the authority that the governor purports to have over over all of these autonomous agencies, independent entities, and certainly over any branch of government. And I think what I would like to see included in this committee report is an analysis of the legal issues that are raised by this order. And so, the constitutionality, certainly, I think council at our session where this issue was first brought up, you did mention that there seemed to be like a conflation of the governor's emergency powers under the Constitution and then his powers to issue executive orders, which don't take effect right away, right? And these emergency executive orders do purport to take effect right away, and he's just been renewing them continually every 30 days, right? And so I would really like our report, the report of this committee, to take apart that legality and examine that and make the appropriate changes so that we are placing a check on this executive exercise of power. And in addition to making the amendments that Representative Abata suggested, I would also suggest, colleagues, that we strongly consider an amendment to the Budget Act that removes the governor's 100% reprogramming power even over the executive branch, because we are seeing an influx of funds already that are supposed to prop up the operations and services of this government, including and especially the executive branch. And so this unlimited reprogramming power is, the argument to justify it is really just not there anymore. And so even within the Planning and Budgeting Act, the governor would still have wide latitude within the existing Planning and Budgeting Act to reprogram upwards of 25%, and he can still reprogram more if this legislature agrees to it, right? So, I think that we are at this point now where it's the event, the current event, the recent history that we've seen, and then the lack of transparency that continues to be a problem. I think it really kind of places on in our lap this need, this urgency to assert some order in our fiscal affairs and place some checks and balances in government. So that's what I'd like to request of council and our LA in the preparation of this report. I do agree with moving forward as has been recommended by Rep. Abata.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Before I move on, Council, this EO will expire in a few days, in about a week. So how do we address this? Do you wanna, there's another EO that's gonna come, that work, I guess we can expect to come out next week to renew this current EO. And so we can either wait till that happens, since our next session won't be till the 28th, or we do we prepare a letter and then come up with a legislation that protects. This is something that looking at the expiration of this EO, no matter what we do to this particular EO, it won't have any effect on future or the current, where we're at currently. So that's something that you members can think about. In the meantime, I recognize Rep. Camacho.
Thank you, Chair. I support Rep. Abata's recommendation. However, I feel that if we're going to do this, why don't we, instead of creating other agencies, I believe we should create an oversight committee for this, right? That would be the best thing going on if there's so much money coming through, or are going to come through. So, as you said, this might just go right ahead and approve itself. However, an oversight committee is probably one of the better ways to do this, and we should be able to do that. Something to think about. Thank you, Ayu.
Thank you, Rep. Camacho. I recognize Rep. Abata.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing up the discussion on the date of expiration for this executive order. I think that because this has been renewed month after month, it would still be in the best interest of the CNMI if we move forward with legal analysis and recommendations on amendments, so that first of all, we can make our statement very clear. And second of all, if it were to be renewed, we'd already have the language prepared by the next session or by the end of the month. So I would still like to move forward with responding to this executive order and not just letting it, fall through the cracks, and hopefully it's not renewed next month, So that's what I would suggest. And then I just want to comment on Rep. Camacho's recommendation. I think that was one of the first things that we recommended to Speaker Villagomez at the beginning of the ARPA funding, communication, is that there be some kind of task force, ARPA task force, or oversight over all the federal funding. And I think that's something we can bring up with the speaker. But I support that too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Abata. Any other member? I recognize Rep. Sattler.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Rep. Abata, for bringing up your concerns and making sure that it was part of our conversation today. I also support looking at amending the scope that the executive order has in order to protect those exact agencies and branches that you mentioned. because it is our role as a legislature to be sure that powers that be, although it is an emergency, are not abused, and that we are able to provide that check and balance that is part of our role. I see just in reading in a lot of the trends across the nation about what's happening in legislatures, and we are not unique to this sentiment, especially the ongoing nature of this pandemic. It would behoove us to make sure that we are keeping our eye on the money, because it can really make a difference to so many. And so with that, I yield and look forward to the future amendments. I don't think we should wait either. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Sandler. Council, can you, I guess, provide what will be the best route to take into account the concerns that are brought up in terms of expiration and the renewal and the, what we do with this one will not affect the next one? What's the next best step that you can recommend?
Sure, no problem. Chairman, can we please take a 5-minute recess at the most?
Short recess, no.
Mike's off.
On Facebook?
Hold on.
before we went on recess, we were discussing governor's communication. All right, governor's communication 22-29. Just to
No way.
just to discuss some of the recommendations made on how we can approach, how we can tackle this communication. So the members have proposed 4 different ways in which we can address this. One of it being a letter from the committee that will explain the extent of the governor's reprogramming authority. Another one is a modification to the next executive order, which we might be expecting after the expiration of the current executive order. Another recommendation was to propose legislation to mandate legislative approval of executive orders that affect legislative budgets. And the 4th recommendation was to propose a bill to revoke the governor's budget authority. All right, discussion on those proposals, members?
Yes, just a clarification.
Recognize Rep. Sablan.
My understanding of the proposed legislation that we were discussing was that we would look at examples from other states and territories and how other legislatures are looking to limit the powers of their governors during states of declared emergency. So in some cases, the legislation that is on the table in these states and territories is to limit the governor's power, or at least require legislative approval for emergency declarations that go beyond a certain number of days. And here we are, over a year now in this state of emergency. And so that was the proposal, was to look at these other jurisdictions and see, what might work here in the scene line. And then the 4th one, to revoke his budget authority. I think that specifically to revoke the 100% reprogramming power that he has under Public Law 2135, so our current fiscal year budget act, which would mean then that we would revert to the reprogramming power that he already had even before this law in the Planning and Budgeting Act. So I just wanted to clarify that, and unless other members had a different understanding, those were the steps that I understood that we were considering.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. I recognize Rep. Avato.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan, for clarifying that. I too shared the same understanding. For the second approach, the modification to the next EO, which is something that we're expecting, that is just in preparation in case this executive order is renewed, correct? Yeah. Yes? Okay. So I just wanted to make that clear. That's my understanding of approach number 2, just so that we're ready to respond should there be a renewal. And then the first approach, the letter coming from this committee to be issued prior to May 19, that's prior to expiration of this current EO, will list the ways that we believe the executive order that this executive order has, what kind of,
Overreaches.
it's over. So are we going to go back? Should we just focus on now and moving forward and not go back and reference executive order 2020-04, 2020-05?
I think it's important to reference the previous orders, just because, if there are questions about constitutionality and legal sufficiency and overreaching of the governor's actual authority, that would mean that all the previous orders that he's been renewing month after month, like those are legally insufficient, right? And so if we just make that clear and do that prior to the expiration of this executive order, then he's on notice. And if he makes the changes, that we would like to see. So particularly with respect to the Secretary of Finance's very broad, unlimited reprogramming powers, then that remains to be seen. But if he doesn't, if it's just the same language, then we can be prepared to address it at our next session.
So clarified. Thank you. Thank you, Rep. Swan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Abalta. Any other member? All right, if there is none, council, please prepare the necessary reports or letter that we can get the members to sign off on before we submit it to the governor. All right, member, that takes care of new business. Moving on to old business, we have House Bill 22-06 to amend 4 CMC Section 1401D to increase revenues by properly taxing tobacco products. Now, we just heard yesterday that this bill, which Representative Sablan incorporated into the tobacco tax bill, already addresses the concerns that were mentioned here, and according to the author of this bill, he supports the additional information that Representative Sablan had included in the bill that we adopted yesterday. And so with that, members, can I get a motion to table this bill?
So move.
All right, the motion made to table House Bill 22-06. Discussion on the motion.
Ready?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All right, motion carries. HB 22-06 is hereby tabled. Moving on to House Bill 22-13 to create the Commonwealth Worker Fee Revolving Fund and to designate the Secretary of the Department of Labor as the expenditure authority of said fund and for other purposes. I know we tabled this bill to get an audience with the Secretary of the Department of Labor. I would just like to ask the Chairman for FFA if you scheduled any meeting with her that we can maybe bring up this concern with her. Chairman, have you had any? Chairman Camacho, yes. Have you scheduled anything with Secretary Benavente yet?
No, not yet.
No, I understand. No, but in regards to the pool situation.
I'm still working on that.
Okay, so if you're okay with, can the committee join you with your meeting with Secretary Benavente to bring up this bill? And so with that, member, can I get a motion to table?
So move.
Motion to table was made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. House Bill 22-13 is hereby tabled. Moving on to miscellaneous. Member, any miscellaneous business they would like to discuss? We do have the next budget hearing will be on Tuesday, 1 o'clock for the 16th Saipan Municipal Council, and then 2 o'clock will be the Saipan Mayor's Office. And then on Thursday will be Medicaid at 1 and CHCC at 2. And that's all for the budget hearing for next week. Members, I recognize Rep. Camacho.
I just wanted to remind the members and everybody out there listening that Precinct 3 is conducting the town hall meeting this evening at 6 p.m. at the Carolinian Booth. Hope to see you there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rep. Camacho. Any other announcements under miscellaneous? Ready? Moving on to the next item. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Motion was made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. This meeting is hereby adjourned at 3:03 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.